The Temple of Solomon has fired the imagination for the nearly 3,000 years that it stood either in Jerusalem or in the Palace of Hallowed Memory. Constructed as a literal house for the Israelite God, the temple served as the dwelling place for the divine on earth. Its meticulous design, its luxurious gold and silver implements, and the famous cedars of Lebanon, while honestly not holding much of a candle to Egyptian and Babylonian shrines, was still a marvel of the ancient Levant. Indeed, it was testimony to the early state-building efforts on the part of the Israelite polity. Yet, doom would come to that very polity in the 6th century BCE. The Temple of Solomon would be razed, and the Judean elite sent into generations of Babylonian captivity. But almost as soon as it was destroyed, questions and then legends about the fate of the sacred temple implements, the vessels, and the fabulous decor began to swirl in the imagination. Were these sacred artifacts totally looted or destroyed? Did some of them, especially the famous Aron Habrit, the Ark of the Covenant, did it somehow survive the ransacking violence and subsequent conflagration? In this episode, I want to explore some of the earliest accounts and legends about the fate of the sacred implements and vessels from Solomon's temple, especially focusing on a legendary account in the Masechet Kelim, or the Treaties on the Vessels. If you're interested in magic, Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content here on YouTube in various topics in esotericism, including curated playlists. Also, if you want to support this work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content on topics in esotericism here on YouTube for free, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on my Patreon with a one-time donation or with the super thanks option you can find below the video. Thank you very much for considering supporting the channel and the project of making Esoterica available. But now, let's turn to the scriptures and legends detailing the fate of the sacred artifacts of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The Temple of Solomon was likely a local shrine for the primitive polity surrounding it. It was, though, enhanced through the financing brought on by the emergence of ancient Israel as a quasi-centralized, organized state actor. While no original evidence of the original shrine exists, that site has been continuously razed and resettled for millennia now, though I do think the Tel Arad Astrakhan 18, or the House of Yahweh Astrakhan, is probably an exception and refers to the Jerusalem temple, and very little in the way of controlled digs have ever been performed in that area. Mainstream historical consensus attests to the existence of the shrine, though the low chronology folks like Finkelstein, will date it to several centuries after the more traditional date of its construction, sometime in the late 10th century BCE, though certainly a central Jerusalem shrine did exist and was sacked in the 6th century BCE. Of course, that was all brought on after the Babylonian vassal state of Judea attempted a series of failed insurrections backed by the Egyptians. Thus, following a 30-month siege of the city, the Babylonian king Nabuchodonosor II, Nebuchadnezzar, razed the city and the surrounding areas. That archaeological evidence, however, is very strongly attested, including the Yahweh shrine perched atop the rocky Mount Zion. It's very likely that all of that stuff was historically real and historically destroyed. Accounts of the carnage can be found in 2 Kings 25, 1-17, and 2 Chronicles 36:18, where we learn that the shrine was systematically looted with the objects in precious metals there, obviously the targets. Sadly, while an earlier siege of the city is recorded in the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle, no such mention was made of this final siege and assault in the known Babylonian records. However, at least some of those spoils were taken as trophies to Babylon, with some of those gold and silver objects being apparently returned by the Persian king Cyrus the Great, the only person, by the way, ever called a Messiah in the entire Hebrew Bible. Those objects were said to be given to Ezra as part of his resettlement of the Judean homeland as part of the Persian Empire and the polity of Yehud. Conspicuously missing from that list in Ezra, however, is the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, the only reference to the fate of the Ark is to be found in a passing reference in the Hebrew Bible in the prophet Jeremiah, who, for what it's worth, had actually argued that the Judeans should have never rebelled against the Babylonians. It should have never teamed up with the Egyptians in the first place, where we're told that Yahweh worship in terms of the ark will lo yomru ad Aaron brit Yahweh, velo ya'ale alev, velo yischru bo, velo yifkudo, velo ya'aseh od. That people will no longer speak of the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. They'll not bring it to mind. They won't even make a mention of it, or they won't miss it or long for it, and they're not going to make another one. That is the closest account we have to an eyewitness for the destruction of the Solomonic Temple. Basically testifies that the ark was lost, there won't be another one, and it won't be missed. I suspect that from the Babylonian perspective, there were at least two reasons to destroy the Ark of the Covenant. First, a wooden box papered over with gold containing broken stones, a stick, and a pot would have not much impressed the worshippers of Marduk or Nabu with their giant city of Babylon and their ziggurats. I suspect they just dumped that stuff out as they were torching the place and happily melted down the Ark of the Covenant. Secondly, insofar as the temple and the box, the Ark of the Covenant, represented the power of the Judahite God, razing it all to the ground would have been the rational thing to do while basically putting down a series of vassal insurrections. It clearly sends the message, you and your gods are powerless. I mean, just imagine the last thing that you see before being dragged into exile is your homeland invaded, your capital city torched, and atop it all, the shrine of your national god being looted before being reduced to ashes. I suspect that made an impression on any future would-be insurgents. Though, it should be noted that the Babylonian sieges weren't the first time the Jerusalem temple was said to have been looted. Early in the history of the shrine, Sheshonq I is said to have looted it himself, and a few generations later, King Jehoash of the Israelite kingdom to the north is said to have done the same. An Israelite king looted the Jerusalem temple. They were never great friends. Later, Judahite kings themselves would raid the temple and its treasuries, mostly to bribe or placate other rulers like the Assyrians, Tiglath-Pileser IV. Even the ever-praised Hezekiah tried to buy off Sennacherib by stripping the stairs of the temple of their gold and giving it to him. So if the Ark wasn't legendary, and I suspect that it probably was a kind of portable Yahweh shrine with a distinct accompanying lore that was brought to Jerusalem as part of Josiah's, let's call it the Inquisition of Josiah, and the centralizing of theopolitics within the narratives about the Ark eventually being included into the larger Israelite myth history. But again, assuming that it wasn't totally legendary, there were clearly pre-Babylonian instances where it could have been seized and destroyed. But at some level, I think that Jeremiah can be trusted. It was certainly lost either in one of the multiple lootings of the temple prior or in the destruction wrought by the Babylonian siege of 586-587 BCE. I don't think it survived. Of course, the simple reality of the historical horror of war has never stopped the growth of legends. Probably what is needed in the aftermath of said horror is, well, hope, and legends give people hope. To add to that hope, recall that the Babylonian siege did last about 2.5 years, plenty of time to hide things, at least within the caverns beneath the city of Jerusalem. And aside from the surviving temple items, which were said to have been given to Ezra by the Messianic King Cyrus, the rest would happily survive in legends. By the composition of the Second Maccabees in the 1st century BCE, mine that's 500 years after the destruction of the Solomonic Temple, if we're keeping times here, we are told that the temple fire itself had been preserved as naphtha and was used to inaugurate the new temple by Nehemiah. Later medieval legends have Ezra doing that exact task. That's probably just a switcheroo in the Jewish lore. Further, we're actually told that Jeremiah spirited away the Mishkan, the Ark, and the altar of incense into a cave, but the location of that cave would not be revealed until the end of days. Though, again, this is all a bit ironic considering what is actually written in the book of Jeremiah about the seeming fate and future of the Ark. Remember, Jeremiah says, it's gone and it won't be missed. By about 100 of the Common Era, items from the temple would be now supernaturally rescued in the literature as well. In narratives of texts like 2nd Baruch, angels would descend upon Jerusalem following its encirclement by the Babylonians, thus rescuing the major elements of the temple service, which would be later swallowed up by the earth, and again, they wouldn't reappear until the end of days. Further texts have Jeremiah and his scribe Baruch secreting the objects away within the earth somehow, or in some ways miraculously placing them into the massive cornerstone of the temple before casting the golden keys of the temple, or in some texts the golden headband the high priest wears, the one that's inscribed with the divine name, Yotevavhe. They throw them into the sun, and the sun keeps them for safekeeping until the coming days of the Messiah. In legends later still, now by the 5th or 6th centuries of the Common Era, the prophet Habakkuk is said to have predicted the coming destruction of the temple, and that angels would have actually descended and taken the pillars of the temple into heaven, again for safekeeping until the end of days. Ancient rabbinical literature also preserves several narratives about the fate of various temple artifacts, especially the Ark of the Covenant. In the most famous of those legends, the righteous king Josiah has the Levites hide the Ark of the Covenant within the confines of the temple precincts itself. It's buried somewhere within the temple. In one story, an explanation is actually given why certain elite families, including the family of the high priest, would perform an additional prostration during the temple service in the direction of the storehouse of the temple firewood, of all things. Well, why? Because all those people shared an ancestral memory that the ark has been hidden there in that direction. In fact, in the most, Dungeons and Dragons-y episode of all of these stories, we're actually told that there was a certain priest who was going about his priestly duties and noticed that one of the paving stones of the temple was slightly different from all those around it. It appeared just so slightly elevated compared to the other temple stones there on the pavement, as if it had been removed and put back into place. It dawned on the priest that this was the secret chamber where the Ark of the Covenant had been hidden, and before he could relate the exact location of that stone to a fellow priest, his soul left his body. God seems to have struck him down, thus keeping the exact location safe. I mean, you think the Tomb of Horrors is hard? Try the Tomb of Yahweh. What these legends have in common, I think, from Jeremiah, Josiah, or even the angels hiding these items away for the coming final messianic days of redemption, is that they represent the possibility of theological continuity, that despite all appearances, the Babylonian siege of 586-587 wasn't complete. In fact, as the legends grow through time, they grow bigger and bigger, more and more of Solomon's temple is saved in the process. In later legends, even musical instruments, wooden beams, and even the interior stonework is miraculously preserved. This all has the effect, in an important way, that the entirety of the temple eventually comes to be saved by prophetic insight, or righteous foresight, or divine revelation, or just angelic intervention as these legends grow and grow and grow. Thus, by the time the Babylonians breached the defenses of the city, these legends have it that there was basically, not much left of Solomon's temple left to destroy, perhaps just an outer shell of stone with all the divine riches hidden away. for the messianic end of times. For people caught in the horror of forced exile, for millennia of forced exile, such legends must have had a powerful psychological effect, the inspiring power of not just hope, but a hope joined by a final apocalyptic victory in which the Messiah paves the way to future redemption by unveiling again the glory of the past divine service in the ancestral Temple of Solomon. It is a forward-looking and backwards-looking hope unified in one vision of redemption. Perhaps no text better combines all of these elements into one narrative than the Masechet Kelim, or the Treatise on the Vessels. This legendary text, as mysterious as it is brief, purports to record the location where the sacred vessels and artifacts of the Solomonic Temple were hidden. The text survives in two rather different recensions, the first appearing as late in a printed form as the 17th century, and the other one is, I kid you not, on two inscribed marble plaques as an addendum to the entire book of Ezekiel, also on marble plaques that was actually probably housed in the tomb shrine of the prophet Ezekiel in Kefil, Iraq. The 17th century version claims to be based on much earlier manuscripts, and the marble plaque edition, at least the two plaques that comprise the Treatise on the Vessels, well, they've gone missing because of course they have. They were actually, the whole collection of 68 were taken from Iraq to Beirut, and then they were smuggled into Israel in the 1950s. The 66 plaques upon which the book of Ezekiel are written can be found at the Yad Ben Tzvi Institute in Jerusalem if you want to see those. And there's no consensus on the age of those plaques, by the way. According to the British Museum, the plaques could be anywhere between 300 to 2,000 years old, though some experts date the script to the 7th or 8th century CE, which makes some sense given what we know about the internal evidence of the text. And that also indicates a pretty similar date, given the text doesn't refer to narratives later than the Babylonian Talmud, which was composed, or redacted rather, in around 500 or 600 of the Common Era. Though the text does mention a city called Baghdad, which might push that dating a few centuries later, though at this point the best range for scholars have to give on when the Treatise of the Vessels was produced was sometime between, well, late antiquity and the 17th century period when it was first attested in print. The two recensions as they exist now consist of a legendary narrative where kings, prophets, and Levites, along with some angels, of course, including some VIPs like Michael and Gabriel, but also lesser-known angels like Shamshiel and Sariel, hide virtually the entirety of the Solomonic Temple treasures in various locales in Israel, in Jerusalem more specifically, and also in Babylon before inscribing those locations on a bronze tablet. That bronze tablet part's going to matter more in a minute. These treasures are heavily exaggerated in scale and number. There are tens of thousands of vestments and lampstands are recorded in this text, and the origin of many of these treasures is also rather legendary. Some of them are said to have been taken from the gold found in the Garden of Eden, jewels that are actually hewn from Mount Sinai by Moses himself, and even some gems placed into musical instruments brought to Solomon by 3 different types of demons. The text also appears to be an accumulation of previous legends kind of stitched together somewhat haphazardly, with a few of the treasures like the silver horns actually mentioned a couple of different times in a couple of different locations. While the Hebrew Bible is the main source for the list of the items to be found in the text, all of the kit of the Mishkan or tabernacle, the golden table, the ark, the incense altars, the shovels, the pans, many dishes and bases, these are all gold, silver, and bronze, the numerous vestments of the priests and the high priests, and various kinds of jewels and gems. Some of them actually taken from the heavenly pavement, musical instruments. There's even fine stone from the interior of the temple, and precious wood, and just massive caches of gold and silver. There's even a couple of magical trees, which are composed of the blood-red parvaim gold, which actually produces further golden fruit. So that's gold trees that make gold fruit. Clearly, some of these items are awesomely legendary, and while the locations of their hiding places are somewhat revealed in the Treatise on the Vessels, such as at Mount Carmel, perhaps in caves near Jerusalem, or in various locations in Babylon, the text does make it abundantly clear that none of these treasures will be found again until they are divinely revealed at the time of the final messianic redemption. So you shouldn't think of Masechet Kelim as a kind of treasure map so much as a treasure litany in praise of the once and future service of the Jerusalem temple. For what it's worth, similar treasure temple litanies are also known from the ancient world, the most famous one being the one produced around 99 BCE for the Athena temple at Lindos. Interestingly enough, the Lindos testimony also testifies to a temple that was destroyed by fire and rebuilt, with its glories composed on permanent materials like stone and bronze, though the marble plaque recension does have the treatise originally being composed on pure ram skin. Of course, the most obvious comparison to the treatise on the vessels, especially that we are told that it was written originally on a tablet of bronze, is the copper scroll found in Cave 3, the furthest from the Qumran settlement in 1952 as part of the larger cache, what we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. This scroll, made in copper, was cut into longitudinal strips in 1956, revealing a similar kind of treasure map-like text. The scroll details, cryptically of course, the location of 64 different caches of gold, silver, priestly objects. There's even another copy of the copper scroll, and this comes out to roughly 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold, depending on how you read the text. It's written in Hebrew, though there are weird Greek letters appearing at some of the locations for reasons that are, treasure map cryptic stuff. There are doubts if this treasure really was ever real or how it ever came to be, and theories abound here from it was the Second Temple treasury pulled together before it was destroyed. It was the resources of the Yachad or the Essene Qumran community itself. It could have been treasure from the period of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132-135 or something else entirely. Although it does strike me that if the treasure wasn't real, I'll go to all the lengths of writing it down on punched copper of all things, but so far none of the treasure of the copper scroll has been found, at least publicly found, with the possible exception of the discoveries at Nachal Hever of some artifacts from the Bar Kokhba era. Though the Masechet Kelim and the copper scroll share another odd thing in common. They both mention a strangely similar hiding place for some of these treasures, a certain Kokhlit in the Copper Scroll and Ein Chokel or Ein Kotel in the Treaties. This is somewhere near Mount Carmel. In fact, in the Copper Scroll, the location is actually the site of a more detailed treasure scroll, making it the central vector for anyone trying to seek out the entirety of the treasures described in the Copper Scroll text. Though it's also worth noting that the Talmud also mentions a place, a certain Kochalit, as being somewhere out in the Transjordan. Though, if these are all the same place, legendary or otherwise, it's not clear, but it's a conspicuous parallel just the same, despite the time gap between the two texts. Recall that the Treaties is describing Solomonic treasures, the Copper Scroll, perhaps treasures from a nearly millennium later period, but who knows? Again, one of those moments where the legends and the lore line up just enough where it's hard not to hold out hope, at least for us Goonies. Or Chokhlit was just a legendary byword for where treasure is, like, I don't know, the word El Dorado as a location that we now use for a long-lost place that won't ever be found that's full of elaborate riches. Who knows what Chokhlit is? Masechet Kelim, or the treatise on the vessels, along with all the early lore of the Solomonic temple treasure, has fired the imagination. It fired the ancient imagination, and of course it would also fire the medieval imagination, especially in texts like the Ethiopian national and religious epic, the Kabra Nagast. History Channel level quality claims that the Templars found the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't. And epic levels of complete insanity with the early 20th century British Israelists doing permanent damage to the Hill of Tara in Ireland, looking for the Ark of the Covenant because the Druids. all topics for another day. If you want to read the Masechet Kelim or the Treaties on the Vessels for yourself, you can check it out in the only English translation by De Villa in the extended edition of the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, which contains all manner of wonderful material. Also, De Villa's blogs, Paleo-Judaica, is absolutely fantastic. I read it as fast as he updates it, so you should subscribe to his blog as well. I'm sure I'm going to circle back to the Copper Scroll along with the lost treasures of the Second Temple, which we have pretty good historical reason may have well survived into late antiquity, along with at least an episode on the Kaber Nagast at some point as well. Also, I want to do an entire episode on various legendary and magical objects said to have owned by Solomon, like his famous ring. But until then, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and if you find Solomonic temple treasure because of this episode, call me. I'm serious. Can you call me? Also, thanks for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.